Look closely at this woman's face. She doesn't look like the kind of person who'd end up on death row, does she? But beneath that calm, quiet expression is a story soaked in fear, manipulation, and murder. This is Cynthia Lynn Coffman, and the truth about her will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and evil. Welcome back to our channel, the place where we uncover the darkest and most shocking true crime stories from around the world. If you love crime mysteries and real-life horror, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Now let's step into the tangled web of Cynthia Lynn Coffman's life as the sixth woman on the list of top 10 women on death row in the USA. Cynthia Lynn Coffman was born in 1962 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her early years were, in many ways, unremarkable, a typical Midwestern upbringing. She was bright, sociable, and according to people who knew her, she had a warmth that made her easy to trust. But beneath that, life was far from perfect. Like many young women in small towns, Cynthia grew up dreaming of something bigger, a different life maybe somewhere far from home. Yet those dreams stayed tucked away as she followed the expected path: school, relationships, and eventually, marriage. In her early 20s, Cynthia married, hoping it would bring stability and the kind of life she had imagined. But her marriage didn't last. The separation left her emotionally vulnerable and searching for a sense of belonging. That's when life threw someone unexpected into her path and everything began to change. It was 1986 in Arizona when Cynthia met James Marlow. Marlow was different from anyone she had ever known. He had a rugged charm, a magnetic confidence, and an air of rebellion. To a woman feeling untethered, he seemed like excitement, adventure, and passion rolled into one. But there was more to James than charm. He had a troubled past, run-ins with the law, a tendency to live on the edge, and a view of the world shaped by hardship and defiance. To friends, it was obvious. James was trouble. To Cynthia, it was irresistible. They fell for each other quickly, the kind of fast-burning romance that feels like destiny at first sight. They were inseparable, feeding off each other's energy. But this wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was intense, unpredictable, and soon, controlling. James had a strong influence over Cynthia. She admired his confidence and independence. But slowly, his influence began to push her into darker territory. By late 1986, Cynthia and James were no longer just a couple in love. They were partners in risk. They traveled together, sometimes with little money, always chasing the next thrill. Somewhere along the way, that thrill started to involve crossing moral lines. They began to target people for financial gain, convincing themselves it was survival, not crime. It's impossible to know the exact moment things went too far. But in the fall of 1986, the choices they made would seal both of their fates. Over the span of just a few weeks, Cynthia and James became linked to a series of shocking incidents involving young women in California and Arizona. Each case had a chillingly similar pattern: women last seen alive after crossing paths with the couple. In every case, the end result was tragic. And in every case, James and Cynthia were soon on the move again, leaving behind unanswered questions and devastated families. The media would later portray them as a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, but this wasn't a romantic outlaw tale. It was something much darker. Their run ended in November 1986. Acting on tips, authorities tracked the pair to a location in California. Surrounded and out of options, Cynthia and James were taken into custody without resistance. From the outside, it seemed like the story was over. But inside the interrogation rooms, the story was just beginning. In interviews, Cynthia painted a picture of fear and control. She claimed that James had manipulated and pressured her, that she had been too afraid to defy him. James, on the other hand, was far less sympathetic and far less willing to take sole responsibility. Investigators now had to untangle the truth. Was Cynthia an equal partner in the crimes, or a woman trapped in a toxic, dangerous relationship? The trial that followed was high profile, with the media zeroing in on Cynthia's role. The prosecution argued she was a willing participant, someone who had chosen this life and helped carry out the acts. The defense portrayed her as a victim, a young woman drawn into a nightmare by an older, manipulative partner. The jury listened to weeks of testimony, from forensic experts to people who knew the couple. In the end, they weren't swayed by the defense's portrayal. In 1989, Cynthia Lynn Coffman was convicted and sentenced to death. James Marlow received the same fate. The verdict shocked some, especially those who believed Cynthia's claims of coercion. Others felt justice had been served. But regardless of opinion, one thing was clear: Cynthia's life would never leave the walls of prison again. In the years that followed, Cynthia remained on death row at the Central California Women's Facility. She gave occasional interviews, often repeating her claims that she never acted on her own and that fear, not malice, had driven her actions. Her story became a case study in the psychology of criminal partnerships. How two people can feed each other's worst instincts until there's no turning back. Whether Cynthia was a victim of control or a willing participant, her case remains a haunting example of how quickly life can spiral. One chance meeting in Arizona, one romance that burned too hot, and a string of choices that ended in tragedy. Number 7. Socorro. Susan Caro, convicted for the 1999 killings of 3 of her children. Socorro Caro was not the kind of person you would expect to read about in crime headlines. She was, on the surface, an ordinary woman. Born in Mexico, she moved to the United States, built a life here, and married. Friends and neighbors described her as quiet, even reserved. She was a mother of 4 boys, children she was often seen taking to school, cheering for at sports events, and bringing to family gatherings. Her life, from the outside, appeared perfectly normal, but appearances can be deceiving. To understand how she ended up where she is today, we have to go back to the late 1990s, when her marriage began to show signs of strain. She and her husband, Xavier Caro, were not strangers to conflict. According to those close to them, arguments became more frequent. Xavier, a physician, worked long hours. Susan spent most of her time caring for the children. But beneath the surface of this family's life, a deep rift was forming. It was November 21, 1999, a Sunday night, when the tragedy occurred. Earlier that day, the Caro family had been at church. By evening, the children were back home, dressed in their pajamas, ready for bed. The house in Santa Clarita was quiet and nothing outwardly suggested what was about to happen. Later, when police arrived, they would find a scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. 3 of the Caro boys, ages 5, 8, and 11, were gone. Each had been fatally injured while lying in their beds. The youngest child, a baby, was still alive, though badly hurt, and would survive. Xavier Caro was not at home when it happened. He was the one who later made the heartbreaking call for help. In the hours that followed, investigators pieced together a grim picture. According to the prosecution's case, the deaths were no accident. The evidence pointed to their mother, Socorro, as the one responsible. The reasons why became the central focus of the trial that would follow. The case drew intense public attention, not only because of the gravity of the crime, but because of the questions it raised. How could a mother take the lives of her own children? What could possibly drive someone to do that? And was there something deeper, something hidden in her mental state that explained her actions? During the investigation, the relationship between Susan and Xavier was examined closely. Prosecutors argued that Susan's actions were motivated by anger toward her husband, an act intended to cause him the most profound pain imaginable. The couple had a history of conflict, and the prosecution suggested that in a moment of desperation, Susan made an irreversible choice. Susan, through her defense attorneys, told a different story. They argued that she had been in a fragile state of mind, suffering from emotional distress and depression. They suggested that she was not fully aware of her actions, that she was struggling in ways no one around her fully understood. They pointed to her history, her personality, and the pressures in her life as factors that may have contributed to the tragedy. The trial began in 2002, nearly 3 years after that November night. By then, public opinion had solidified against her. The media portrayed her as cold, detached, even unrepentant. The courtroom was often packed, not just with journalists, but with members of the community who had followed the case from the beginning. Witness after witness was called. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, photographs, and testimony from investigators. They painted a clear, if deeply unsettling, picture of what had happened in that house. The defense countered with their own witnesses, including mental health experts who testified about Susan's state of mind. Throughout it all, Susan sat quietly at the defense table. Observers noted that she rarely showed emotion, a fact that prosecutors used to their advantage, suggesting that it reflected a lack of remorse. Her attorneys argued that this was simply her personality, reserved, guarded, not someone who expressed herself openly. especially under the crushing weight of a capital trial. When it came time for the jury to deliberate, the stakes could not have been higher. California's laws allowed for the possibility of the death penalty, and the prosecution had made it clear they intended to seek it. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances that made the death penalty applicable. In 2003, Socorro Susan Caro was formally sentenced to death. She was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, the largest women's prison in the United States and the location of the state's women's death row. Since then, she has lived there, awaiting the outcome of appeals and the slow-moving process that defines capital punishment cases in California. Her case remains a point of fascination for true crime followers. Part of the reason is the sheer rarity of women on death row. At any given time, there are only a handful in California, compared to hundreds of men. Another reason is the complexity of her story. Was she a cold, calculating individual who committed the ultimate act of revenge? Or was she a woman overcome by mental and emotional turmoil, unable to think clearly in a moment of crisis? The truth, as in many such cases, may never be fully known. Over the years, Susan's name has resurfaced occasionally in legal filings and court updates. Her attorneys have continued to pursue appeals, challenging aspects of her trial and sentencing. But as of today, her conviction and death sentence still stand. For the families involved, and for those who remember the 3 young lives lost, the pain has never truly gone away. The Caro case serves as a grim reminder of how quickly a family's life can change, and how deep the wounds can run when that change is born from violence. In California, executions have been on hold for years, meaning that Susan is unlikely to face her sentence anytime soon. Instead, she remains in the small, highly controlled section of the prison reserved for women condemned to die, living out her days in a world far removed from the suburban streets where her life once unfolded. Number 8. Maria del Rocio Alfaro, sentenced to death for the 1990 murder of a child. Rosie was born into a world where instability was the norm. Money was scarce, her family life was fractured, and the streets became both her escape and her cage. By her early teens, she was already in the orbit of drugs, petty theft, and people who lived by a different set of rules. It wasn't a straight fall into crime, it was a slow slide, almost invisible at first. A missed day of school here, a shoplifting incident there. A bit of trouble became a lot of trouble, until the idea of consequences began to fade. Rosie learned early that survival often meant making choices most people couldn't imagine. But those choices built a path that, whether she realized it or not, was leading her toward a single day in 1990 that would change everything forever. That day started like any other for Rosie, no alarms blaring, no sense that the hours ahead would mark her name in history. She was restless, driven by the need for her next fix. Drug use had been gnawing at her for years by then, warping her thoughts and sharpening the edges of her desperation. In that state of mind, a small decision could turn into something enormous and irreversible. Her target wasn't a stranger from across town, it was someone she knew. 9-year-old Autumn Wallace lived in a nearby neighborhood, a bright, trusting child who thought of Rosie as someone safe, even friendly. Autumn's family had crossed paths with Rosie before, and in a world where familiarity often built trust, Autumn had no reason to think danger was standing at her door. When Rosie arrived at Autumn's home that day, it wasn't for a social visit. She was after valuables she could trade for drugs, a quick fix for a deep hunger she couldn't quiet. She didn't expect anyone to be home. But the moment she stepped inside, she found Autumn there. And in that instant, the plan she'd had in mind was at risk of unraveling. Most people, faced with a child in such a moment, would have turned and left. But Rosie's life had been spiraling for so long that her thoughts were no longer the thoughts of most people. What happened next was not a single decision, it was a rapid, chaotic rush of fear, impulse, and the crushing weight of addiction. The details of that afternoon were later pieced together in court. Autumn was attacked, an act so shocking it would leave a deep scar on the community. When Rosie left the house, the girl who had once smiled up at her with trust was gone forever. It didn't take long for the investigation to lead to Rosie. She was questioned, and soon the truth began to surface. The prosecution painted her as cold and calculated. The defense pointed to her years of drug abuse, poverty, and a troubled past. But for the jury, none of that erased the reality of what had happened to Autumn. The trial was a storm of emotion. Witnesses took the stand. Evidence was laid out piece by piece. Rosie, sitting in the courtroom, faced the weight of what she had done, not just the crime, but the life that had shaped her into the person who committed it. The verdict came back, guilty of first-degree murder, and the sentence was death. California's death row for women, located at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, became Rosie's new home. The cell, the routines, the sound of metal doors locking shut, all of it was a far cry from the streets she once knew. Over the years, she has spent countless days in that small space, with nothing but time to think about the choices that brought her there. But Rosie's story didn't fade into the background after her sentencing. She became one of the names people point to when talking about the most notorious cases in California's history. Her case has been discussed in documentaries, true crime programs, and podcasts, not just for the crime itself, but for what it says about cycles of poverty, addiction, and violence. Life on death row is not one of drama and constant movement. It's one of stillness, of waiting. Days blur together, interrupted only by occasional legal proceedings or rare visits. Appeals have been filed on Rosie's behalf, but each one has been met with the same outcome. The conviction and sentence stand. Those who knew Autumn Wallace remember her as a happy, lively child who loved life. Her loss is still felt deeply by her family and community. For them, justice was found in Rosie's sentence, but justice can't fill the absence left behind. And so Rosie remains one of the few women in California with a death sentence hanging over her. Her life now is a far echo from the streets she once roamed. There is no rush for the next high, no new plan for the next day, just the long shadow of the past and the knowledge that, for one afternoon in 1990, she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Every person who hears her story is left to wrestle with the same questions. How much of a crime is born from the choices of a single moment? And how much is written years before in the silent hardships no one sees? Rosie's life offers no easy answers, only the undeniable truth that one person's breaking point can shatter more lives than their own. 9. Taylor Renee Parker, convicted of killing a pregnant woman and removing the unborn child. This is the most recent on the list, and one of the most gruesome crimes in modern days. She wasn't just someone struggling with loss, she became a perpetrator of a crime so shocking it sent ripples through communities, legal circles, and the nation's collective conscience. In October 2020, 29-year-old Taylor Renee Parker carried out an act of unimaginable horror. She murdered her pregnant friend, Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock, extracting the unborn child from her womb. The baby did not survive. The brutality, the betrayal, the calculated deceit, it all became the center of one of the most disturbing cases of recent times. Taylor lived in the small town of New Boston, Texas, a place where people knew their neighbors and fewer stories made headlines. In the month leading to the tragedy, she had meticulously performed the persona of a woman expecting a child. She faked ultrasounds, posted pregnancy updates on social media, even hosted a gender reveal celebration. To anyone watching, it seemed like she was building a normal future. But behind the facade lay a mind unraveling, driven by desperation and a deep unwillingness to lose what she hadn't truly had. Reagan Simmons Hancock was 21 years old, and 8 months pregnant when her path crossed with Taylor's in ways no one could have predicted. Reagan was described by those who knew her as vibrant, kind, and trusting, qualities that made the betrayal that followed feel even more personal. The two had been friends. Taylor had photographed Reagan's engagement and wedding. Reagan likely trusted Taylor enough to have her in her home. Then came October 9, 2020. That morning, New Boston's 911 line rang with a chilling report. Someone had broken into Reagan's home and she was badly hurt. First responders arrived to a nightmare. Reagan lay dead, her abdomen gruesomely cut open, the unborn baby missing. Her 3-year-old daughter was found unharmed but caught in the aftermath. Halfway down the highway, a state trooper pulled over a speeding Toyota Corolla. Inside was Taylor, appearing panicked, clutching a newborn. An umbilical cord dangled from her pants as though she had just given birth. Paramedics were summoned. Taylor claimed she had delivered the baby herself, alone on the side of the road. But doctors were skeptical. She was taken to a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. Medical staff quickly realized the horrifying truth. The baby was not hers, and she had not given birth. The unidentified woman's body matched the description of Reagan Simmons Hancock, missing and presumed dead. Taylor later admitted to a physical altercation with the victim and the removal of the infant from her body. From that moment, Taylor's carefully constructed world unraveled. Prosecutors described her months-long campaign of deception, creating fake ultrasounds, lying on social media, and staging a happy pregnancy story. Meanwhile, the prosecution emphasized that she had researched delivering a baby at 35 weeks, how to fake a pregnancy convincingly, and what hospital staff would expect. Reagan's case made headlines across Texas and beyond. The brutality was indescribable. Prosecutors testified that Reagan had been slashed over 100 times, beaten, and had her skull crushed with a hammer before the unborn child was removed with a scalpel. The scene outside her home would be forever burned into the memory of first responders and investigators. Taylor's arrest was swift, and her story began to fall apart. In court, she would insist she was insane, but the jury's attention was on the layers of planning, the betrayal of trust, and the loss of 2 innocent lives. Over a remarkably efficient 25-day trial, the defense argued that Taylor was traumatized, living through unresolved issues and mental distress. They claimed she wasn't right in her mind. A neurologist would later suggest she displayed signs of frontal lobe syndrome, asserting that portions of her brain were impaired, affecting judgment and impulse control. But the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued Taylor was driven by fear of abandonment, fear of losing her boyfriend, fear of what losing her pregnancy would mean. One prosecutor asked rhetorically, "How did it get this far?" referring to the elaborate lie that began months earlier and culminated in unspeakable violence. Jurors were shown evidence of Taylor's digital footprint, searches for delivering a baby, pregnancy preparation, and false imagery that supported her illusion. They heard testimony from medical personnel, Crown forensic experts, friends who were invited to the gender reveal party, and family members of the victim whose grief echoed through the courtroom. And then came the verdict. After just over an hour of deliberation, a jury of 6 women and 6 men found Taylor Renee Parker guilty of capital murder for killing Reagan Simmons Hancock and kidnapping the baby, who had a heartbeat when she was removed. Courtroom emotion hit its peak during the victim impact statements. Reagan's mother turned to Taylor and delivered words that cut sharper than any testimony. "My baby was alive, still fighting for her babies, when you tore her open and ripped her baby from her stomach," she said. The statement was raw, painful, impossible to forget. Taylor was visibly shaken, sobbing as she listened. On November 9, 2022, Judge John Tidwell handed down the sentence, "Death by lethal injection." Those words were followed by more courtroom ritual. Taylor was handcuffed, escorted out, and given one final instruction from the judge: take her to death row. Taylor is now housed on Texas's female death row at the Patrick Daniel unit in Gatesville. She joined an already small group one of just 7 women on Texas's death row at the time. Her new life is defined by isolation, routine, and the long wait that capital inmates endure. It is a world shaped by steel bars and lost futures. Her case continues to circulate among true crime followers, not only for its cruelty but for the irony of deception. A woman who could only have a child through artifice went to extraordinary lengths to claim a child that was not hers, destroying 2 lives in the process. Taylor's story also echoes broader, chilling conversations about fetal rights and laws meant to protect the unborn. What's especially haunting is how close Taylor's performance of normality came to fooling everyone. A gender reveal party? Fake ultrasounds? Social media posts of baby names? It was all part of an illusion until it wasn't. The same steps many take toward motherhood, she took to mask violent obsession. The case also raises questions about vigilance and early warning signs. People close to her, including her boyfriend and friends, missed or overlooked the mounting deception. And so, no safety net interrupted her descent into violence. As Taylor's defense attorney remarked in closing, there were no safety nets when everyone saw the wheels were off. Unfortunately, by the time anyone realized what had really been happening, it was too late. Decades from now, Taylor will remain one of the most haunting cases in recent American crime. Reagan's name is not forgotten, nor is Braxlin, the unborn baby who was still fighting in her mother's body when Taylor acted. Their loss remains a wound that lingers. Taylor Renee Parker's story is not just about violence. It's about the extremes of human longing, the power of deception, and how far someone might go when driven by shame, fear, or desperation. It's about betrayal dressed as friendship, and the tragic consequences when that illusion collapses under the weight of truth. And for those of us left trying to make sense of it all, we must not look away. Number 10. Donna Roberts, convicted in the 2001 murder of her ex-husband. Donna Marie Roberts was once a woman whose life followed familiar patterns. A childhood in Youngstown, Ohio, aspiring for stability, then a string of marriages, business ventures, and a life seemingly built around community and family. Born in 1944, she spent her early years in the suburbs, graduating from Austintown Fitch High School and attending Youngstown State University for a time. She married in 1966 and had a son in 1969, but by 1971, that marriage had ended. A few years later, she married again, then later divorced. In 1983, she met and married Robert Fingerhut, a man who, for a while at least, seemed to bring her closer to the life she wanted. Together, they acquired homes, ran Avis car rental franchises at the Youngstown Warren Regional Airport, and even opened a restaurant called Just the Ticket in a bus terminal. On the surface, they appeared successful, engaged in local business, and part of the community's rhythm. But beneath that veneer, a dangerous pattern was forming, tied to money, control, and illicit romance. By 1993, they had settled in Howland Township, Ohio. Robert managed their businesses. Donna, while less visible, was deeply involved in the household and their ventures. Yet friends and neighbors would later say they saw tension simmer beneath their facade. The sliver of daylight into Donna's secret life came when she began an affair with Nathaniel Jackson. Not a business colleague, but someone she met while working. Jackson was younger, troubled, and soon behind bars on unrelated charges. But prison couldn't stop what was brewing between them. They began exchanging letters, nearly 300 of them, and made dozens of phone calls, even as Jackson served time. Between October and December 2001, Jackson's letters turned darker, more insistent, and increasingly explicit in their intent. In one note, he wrote, "Robert has to go, so that we can really be together." In another chilling message, he referred to Fingerhut's eventual fate with a mocking twist on farewell. "Rest in peace." Jackson was released on December 9, 2001. Donna, waiting nearby, picked him up. 2 days later, on December 11th, Robert Fingerhut was found dead shot multiple times in the kitchen of the house they still shared. The crime scene looked at first like a robbery gone wrong, but detectives quickly noticed how too much a play was eerily scripted. Investigators uncovered not only the letters and recorded phone calls, but also a mask and gloves purchased just for the crime. The couple hadn't stopped at intellectual plotting, they had provided tools. Further investigation revealed powerful forensic evidence tying both Jackson and Roberts to the crime. A garbage bag retrieved from the motel where Jackson stayed was found to contain blood-stained bandages, gauze, and peroxide linked to his DNA. Fingerhut's car contained a mixture of both men's DNA. And cell phone records placed calls from Roberts' phone to the crime scene during the hours of the murder calls she initially dismissed as just borrowed. In 2003, Roberts stood trial on charges of complicity in aggravated murder, conspiracy, burglary, and robbery. The prosecution depicted a calculated, cold-blooded scheme, a loving partner transformed into a conspirator, orchestrating the death of her ex-husband to collect over $500,000 in life insurance. The jury didn't hesitate. Roberts was convicted and sentenced to death. Jackson, her lover and accomplice, received the same fate. What followed was a long fight through Ohio's legal system. In 2006, the Ohio Supreme Court ordered a resentencing, citing procedural issues. In 2007, Roberts was resentenced to death. In 2013, her sentence was once again vacated and remanded for failing to properly consider mitigating factors. Yet in 2014, the court reaffirmed the death penalty. She appealed again in 2017 and again was denied. In 2020, a scheduled execution was stayed, placing the sentence on hold until all appeals were exhausted. Most recently, a federal judge rejected her habeas corpus petition in 2023, leaving the conviction and death sentence firmly in place. Today, 79-year-old Donna Roberts remains incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, the only woman on Ohio's death row, living under sentence yet not executed, her future bound in uncertainty. Her case continues to resurface in true crime media. Snapped. Killer couples, deadly women, calls from the inside, each episode peeling back the layers of love, betrayal, and lethal ambition that defined her crimes. Donna Roberts' story is a study in contradictions. A woman whose life was defined by both entrepreneurial success and deeply damaging choices. She retained control over the family ventures and appeared put together, yet was willing to recruit a lover, plan a murder, and risk everything for what she wanted. She offered false calls, misleading behavior, and a seemingly teary phone call after the murder, then tried to lead investigators astray with vague hints of rival lovers or imagined enemies. For those who knew the couple, the betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. Here was a woman who walked alongside her ex-husband, lived with him after divorce, managed businesses together, and yet plotted his demise. The names of their enterprises, the showroom of rental cars, the smiling faces in early photos, all were fragments of lives that would come crashing down under suspicion and condemnation. Her legal journey underscores the complexities of Ohio's death penalty system, resentencing, appeals, procedural challenges, and the slow unraveling of judicial possibility. Yet it also highlights the persistent weight of victim impact, insurance money, recorded planning, and the human cost of manipulated trust. Donna Roberts remains a singular figure in Ohio's criminal justice history. The woman who crafted a double life, one public, respectable, and embedded in community, the other shadowed by conspiracy, betrayal, and murder. As legal weeks turn into years, her sentence endures, her appeals exhausted, her place on death row undisputed. And perhaps that is what keeps her story alive. It's not just that she was a woman on death row. It's that she climbed there not through impulse or sudden madness, but through a carefully constructed plan of letters, calls, gifts, and betrayal at its most personal. It's the story of what it means when ambition, obsession, and the promise of life insurance collide, and how betrayal can come from the one person you once stood beside. These 10 women's stories reveal the darkest extremes of human behavior, tales of greed, rage, revenge, desperation, and cold calculation. While their crimes vary in method and motive, each left behind shattered families, communities haunted by loss, and a justice system forced to confront the question of ultimate punishment. Death row is not just a place. It's the final chapter in a life that has crossed an irreversible line. For these women, the countdown continues, each appeal another turn in a long legal battle. Each day, a reminder of the lives they took, and the choices that brought them here. In the end, the facts of their cases will be studied, debated, and remembered, not for admiration, but as cautionary tales of how quickly humanity can be lost and how justice responds when it is. Thank you for watching this heartbreaking stories. Which story scared you the most? If you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime, subscribe to our channel for more chilling cases, criminal psychology, and global investigations that the world should never forget. Until next time, stay informed, stay aware.